So I forget who it was that said, the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable man expects the world to adapt to him. Therefore, all progress comes from the unreasonable man. And so I've always tried to, and I forget who said it. And so I've always tried to be that unreasonable man who tries to make the world accommodate me.
This podcast is sponsored by Engineered Tax Services, a subsidiary of Engineered Advisory, whose goal is to support CPAs and their clients to achieve the highest and best use of time and resources. ETS offers specialty tax services and incentives, which help expand your capabilities and ensure that your clients are paying only what is required in taxes and nothing more. To learn more about Engineered Tax Services, go to engineeredtaxservices.com and mention the Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise podcast to receive project discounts and a free CPA partnership ebook. Hi, everyone. This is Heidi Henderson, and you are listening to the Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise podcast for accountants. I am really passionate about people and the industry. And I truly believe that the accounting industry can do better for both our clients and its professionals. So I'm going to share insights from people who have found professional success and who have managed to balance that with their physical, mental, and personal health. So I hope you enjoy, and I hope you get inspired. Accountants can earn free CPE from listening to this episode. Just visit earmarkcpe.com, download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. And now, on to the episode. Hi, everyone. This is Heidi Henderson, and I'm so excited for today's guest. We have David Spray with us, who is the founder and president of Export Advisors. He specializes in IC disc, which a lot of people are not familiar with. But, I've known David for over 10 years now, and he is the go-to guy. And not only that, as far as what he brings to the table from a professional standpoint and his ability and his knowledge in this space with tax credits, David's just a great guy. And I'm super excited to talk with him today. And we're going to talk a little bit about his business and how he built this, how he's kind of evolved over time. And then also going forward, David has done some really neat things with being innovative and starting his own podcast, by the way, which we'll have to mention here. It's pretty neat how he's been cutting edge on that. So anyway, David, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited for us to sit and chat.
Likewise, thank you for the opportunity, Heidi. I've been looking forward to it.
Perfect. Okay, so instead of starting at the beginning, let's start at the beginning of you diving into IC disc. So what drove you to where you're at today in terms of being the IC disc specialist?
So I have a background in accounting, former CPA, started my career at Arthur Andersen in Houston, served the obligatory 2-year tour of duty, and then got my MBA from the University of Houston. And my career has been split between finance and accounting and sales and marketing. And I was working for a local Houston firm about 20 years ago, and I joined a specialty tax firm that did a number of things, but for whatever reason, the export incentives just seemed to be the right fit for my clients. And that firm decided they really didn't like that space. They didn't think it was big enough. So I had the opportunity to go off my own in 2009 and formed Export Advisors then. And I've always been a big fan of niche marketing. I've heard the saying, the riches are in the niches.
Oh,
So I wanted to be the only IC disc only firm in the country. And that's been kind of what the focus has been. And it's worked out well.
okay. So I'm going to reuse your quote, riches are in the niches. And I'm going to remember that because I love that. And, this podcast, I'm really gearing towards CPAs and accountants. I hope there are other business owners here and people interested in a lot of these different credits and how they apply. But from a CPA standpoint, I'm a firm believer that in all industries, including the accounting industry, that to your point, finding a niche can absolutely make the difference between extreme success or, being mediocre. And I've seen it with so many different companies. So I think that's so fascinating. Tell me a little bit about IC Disc. Let's talk a little bit. What exactly is this particular credit?
Yeah, so it stands for Interest Charge Domestic International Sales Corporation.
Well,
Quite a mouthful,
yeah.
hence the acronym IC Disc. And it's actually a program that's been around in one form or another since 1971. And it's been, quote, going away since 1972.
Wow.
So as long as I've been in this space since 2005, I guess, the attitude has been, yeah, it's not going to stay around. And every few years, somebody in Congress decides they don't like it and they try to cut it, but it's been durable.
Hmm.
And the whole so we take a step back. The 80s really launched Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, kind of brought in more of a free trade approach. And so there was a shift away from import tariffs to more free trade, but the industrialized nations still wanted to protect their own industries. So they developed these export incentives as kind of a backdoor way of being protectionistic. These programs come and go because they are protectionistic. There was a program in, I think it was 2004, the extraterritorial income exclusion. And like year one, Boeing saved like $2 billion in taxes.
Wow.
So that took about 5 minutes after Airbus found out about that to go run into the English and French governments. And then that program was gone. So these programs tend to be short lived because they typically benefit large public companies. The IC Disc, for whatever reason, is really only geared toward privately held, closely held companies. So it's one of the reasons it has survived, I believe, as long as it has, is it's it's not like the Fortune 500 companies are benefiting from it. So it kind of flies below the radar screen.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when a company, a closely held company then is able to utilize this, what exactly are they doing? This is an export credit, right? So it has something to do with exporting goods. Is it any type of services or is it goods only?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it applies to virtually any product that's harvested, extracted, grown, manufactured in the US
Hmm.
that has an ultimate destination outside the US. And the services are very limited. It's only engineering and architectural services for construction projects outside the US.
Okay.
So most of our clients are, they produce something.
Hmm.
And there's a US content requirement. So what you can't do is like import something from China, turn around and export it to Mexico.
Got it. Yeah.
So the idea is that it's helping US manufacturing.
Got it. So it's got to have its origin in the US from the very get-go, and then it goes through that entity exporting somewhere offshore, anywhere outside of the US?
Yeah, including Canada and Mexico. There's a
Hmm.
few countries that are prohibited. They don't count, like, the normal suspects. I think Cuba, Iran,
Hmm.
North Korea. Some of those countries we don't like to trade with. And the only products specifically excluded are primary oil and gas derivative or distillates, raw timber, and military technology. Basically, things that we don't really want to export.
Yeah, things we don't wanna share, our trade secrets.
Exactly. Exactly.
So so how I mean, not to ask I guess the question is not how do you calculate the credit? My question would be is then what's kind of I really don't know anything about the value. I know with R&D credits that we specialize in, it's this range that has so many different factors and the actual dollar amount of the credit has a million variables. So people always ask, "Well, but how much is it?" I don't know if IC Disc is similar to that where, well, that's not an easy answer, but how do you look at the value proposition for the credit?
Yeah. So I should probably take a step back and just describe the program in a little more detail.
Okay.
And so on the surface, so here's some interesting stats about the IC disc just as a backdrop. In 2010, according to the IRS, there were only 2,000 IC discs in existence. We think today it's maybe triple that, somewhere 8,000 range. So it's really interesting how underutilized it is. So, in our opinion, probably 90% of the companies who would benefit from an IC disc have never heard of it. And the 10% who have heard of it, 90% of those never implemented it.
Hmm.
And so why is that? So there's a couple of reasons. One is it actually requires the formation of a separate entity that files an election to be treated as an IC disc. So right off the bat, if a company hears, oh, there's a separate entity, it just sounds too complicated.
Yeah.
Or they reach out to their attorney about forming one of these. The attorney's never heard of it. Frequently, the attorney, the CPA, no one's heard of it. And so that's one reason people don't move forward. And then the other is, they just, if they don't know somebody like us, it's just really a daunting project.
Hmm.
So we have a turnkey solution. We'll actually do the formation and all the documents, do the annual compliance and calculations. It actually files its own tax return, 1120-IC-DISC.
Huh.
So we actually prepared that return as well. Probably only 1 out of 200 companies are a candidate. And typically it needs to be privately held, closely held, exporting at least, $3-4 million a year of a US produced product. And the company needs to be pretty predictably profitable. Because if you think about it, like a startup company who's, not even making money, tax savings is low on their priority list. And if you just think about the local businesses in your community, the grocery store, the restaurants, the dry cleaner, none of them would qualify.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the challenges is that, even a good sized local CPA firm with 100, corporate clients that do 20 million a year of revenue, statistically, maybe one of them will be a candidate for it. So it's not cost effective for the CPA firm to try to have a whole practice to serve one client.
Yeah.
And there's so many other programs that benefit a much larger portion of their clientele.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we see that in a lot of the specialty tax areas, and a lot of taxpayers will always ask us that, well, why isn't my CPA doing this? Why didn't my CPA tell me about it? What's going on? Should I hire someone
Yeah.
else, or why did I miss it? You and I actually had this conversation a little bit, and I love your response. So tell me what your response is, because I love how you explained why this is not typically handled by a CPA.
Well, you're putting me on the spot now. I think I liked your answer better, but I don't remember it exactly. So I guess I'll have to use mine. We just say, we really hate the question, to be honest, because we really don't want to be in the middle. We don't want to throw the CPA under the bus. As a former CPA, I have a affinity for the profession and a understanding of how challenging it can be. So we just say, look, when you factor in the city, county, state, federal tax code, how voluminous it is, how broad it is, that your CPA needs to really be a generalist.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very specialized. You likely are the only client at the firm who would even qualify for this. And so they have to spend their time and their resources on expertise that will benefit, a large portion of their clients. So that's usually how we handle it. We just try to protect the CPA, say, look, they're hardworking. They have to know, 1,000 things. We only have to know one thing.
Exactly.
That's usually how we approach it.
Well, and I love, I've known you for 10 years now, but I only just learned right now that you've got this full turnkey setup where you're doing the whole formation and the tax prep on those documents as well. So I think that's pretty fascinating and obviously creates a lot of value. Again, putting you on the spot as it relates to kind of the overall value proposition for this credit. If you had a client with about $3 million in exports and they're profitable, give me ballpark, even if it's a big range, just to give us sort of a general parameter. What's a ballpark credit amount for a company maybe doing 3 million in exports?
So, in fact, I didn't quite answer your earlier question. I probably should describe it in a little more detail how it works, because that'll give the context for the answer.
Okay.
So the way it works is the operating company pays a sales commission to the IC disc. And we calculate that. And there's a number of ways to calculate it, but it is essentially the taxable income from exports. So let's just use an example. Let's say a company does 10 million in total revenues, 3 million of exports, and they make $2 million a year of net income. So if we just did a straight allocation and we divided the exports by total sales, that's 30% times the 2 million of income, that's 600,000. And approximately that's the approximate amount of income that can be transferred to the IC disc. Now I'm doing it very simplistically, but it's going to vary anywhere from about 300,000 to $1 million in this scenario.
Okay.
But let's just say there's 600,000. So this is shifted to the disc.
Mhm.
So that's a deductible expense by the operating company. So let's say they're an S corp, that's going to reduce their taxable income by, say 37%. The disc is effectively a non-taxable C corp.
Okay.
So the disc itself pays no tax, but when it distributes its profits, the shareholder picks up that income at qualifying dividend rates.
Hmm.
So basically, every dollar that gets shifted to the disc, now it used to be even more valuable. At one point, the spread between ordinary rates and dividend rates was 20%. And there were fewer tax brackets. So it was very easy to say, yeah, your savings will be 20% of what your IC disc commission amount is. So today it's going to range from about 6 to 13% for a flow through an S Corp or partnership. For a C Corp, it effectively eliminates the corporate layer altogether. So it's saving roughly 21%.
Wow.
So in this scenario, if we take 600,000 times 21%, that's what, about 120,000 for a C Corp. For an S Corp, 6% of 600,000 is 36,000. So call it 35 to 70,000.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Well, I appreciate the calculation because, like I say, even I've been familiar with IC Disc, but it's, I get the same questions again on the R&D side, which is, I mentioned that because it's what I understand. But it's the same thing. It's really difficult to pinpoint and try to draw those parameters of kind of roughly what that amount is. But that's helpful. And it's interesting. I didn't understand the correlation between having a totally separate entity that is an IC Disc. So that's pretty fascinating. You mentioned that years ago there was about 2,000 and maybe now there's roughly 3 times that. I'm curious, and this is kind of, I think you are the guy. Maybe there are others, but I've known you for a long time. So you spun out, started this group, became a specialist in this niche, and you've really built your name and your company and an incredible service. Do you know what the market share is that you have serviced?
So we collectively, I'm also a founding member of the IC Disc Alliance, which was an idea that I've had for a while, and where we've pulled together to become even more of a specialist in IC Disc. We've pulled together some firms that have specialized software and specialized data
Hmm.
cleansing capabilities and other capabilities to form the IC Disc Alliance to even more comprehensively serve our clients. So I think if we look at all the clients of the Alliance, I think it's somewhere north of 400.
Okay.
So that would be, maybe 10% of the market
Hmm.
that we serve. And we think that's more than anyone else. It tends to be very fragmented.
Got
Our
it.
competition are large CPA firms that, that we say kind of dabble in it because just the numbers, it's just not a big enough market.
Right, right.
So yeah, so maybe 10% of the
Okay.
market we handle. But in some industries, like the scrap metal industry is one of our biggest sectors. We probably handle half of the IC discs in the scrap metal business.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So very, very focused on that vertical. That's pretty neat. You have a foothold in that. That's really fascinating, especially considering the number of CPA firms and large firms that probably do that type of specialty work. The other thing I would assume is that they charge a premium for that. It's exactly what we've seen in our space as well, is that we've got big four CPA firms that will do this type of stuff. They do it pretty good. They charge a premium for it because they have the brand label and the overhead. But when you really look at the fascinating thing with some of these specialists, where to call you a specialist and expert in this space, is that if I had to guess, your pricing is probably very competitive, but yet you probably are better than what you would find in some of those big four firms. Not to throw anybody under the bus, but you're just so focused on just that and have become such an expert in it. So do you find that being the case, that from a competitive standpoint, you're very kind of competitive because of how efficient you've become at it?
Yeah, and that's a great point. When you do just one thing, the efficiencies are extraordinary. I mean, like our revenues per employee, they probably dwarf that of even a big four firm
Mm,
because it's so efficient because we've got processes to do the same thing over and over and over.
yeah.
We find that even at the big four, they really have limited true IC disc capability. And the reason is because remember, the R&D can be used by public companies, private companies,
Yeah.
but the disc is really only used by private, under $100 million revenue companies. And, I know the big four claim that they all have entrepreneurial advisory practices, but, it seems like the A talent is serving the Fortune 500 clientele. So it's just this, and then we have this other joke. Nobody makes partner as the IC disc expert. So there's really
Yeah.
there's a disincentive for somebody to really dig in. And I think I haven't calculated exactly, but I think if you look at the 10 largest CPA firms, I think we've had clients move from every one of those firms. And in every situation, there were things done incorrectly. Now, I'm not saying all the clients served by all those firms, that's the case, but it's just kind of a perfect storm of, their tax software has the tax return. It's a short return. The instructions are only 6 pages long. So on the surface, it just seems like you can hand this to a junior person and start putting numbers in boxes. But like a lot of things, there's more complexity to that. Like a simple example is that there's a requirement to make a payment to the IC disc, an initial payment within 60 days of the end of the year. No non-IC disc corporation has such a requirement,
Hmm.
right? If you have an S corp, there's no requirement that you make some distribution
Yeah.
by any time.
Yeah.
And there's a number of requirements like this that a CPA firm or even a specialty firm like yours is not set up to remind clients to do this money movement. And then you've got to true up the number within 90 days after filing the disc return. And there's just some other things, there's these different tests and you have to have a certain amount of money in the bank account for the disc, but you can't have too much money. So if you have too much, it disqualifies it. If you have too little, it disqualifies it. If you don't move enough money, it disqualifies it. If you move too much money, it disqualifies it. So what we oftentimes find is just the firm just doesn't have, it become like a firm that does like marketing suddenly gets into tax prep
Yeah.
and they have no calendar system they follow with any kind of calendar deadlines, like trying to do tax work without having reminders of all the different tax deadlines.
Yeah, for sure. So then if a company sets up an IC disc, do you guys help like the ongoing management to keep an eye on things like that? All those little
We do.
pitfalls that you don't know otherwise?
Yeah, no, it's a turnkey solution. And that's the other thing. I would say 80% of the IC discs that we come across where they want a second opinion, probably 80% of the time they're technically disqualified
Oh,
because they haven't, done the things they need to do regularly.
hey, interesting.
And
Really
so,
interesting.
yeah, so we have our service. It's a comprehensive service. We just charge a flat fee, unlimited questions. It's just an all in one thing. If they
Hmm.
get audited, we cover, we handle it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, but we do. So just to give you an overview, we start in January by getting year end estimates.
Mm.
So we can help calculate what's called the 60-day rule because you have to make a estimated payment that has to be a reasonable estimate.
Hmm.
And the IRS defines reasonable as at least 50% of the finally determined amount. So that's what's called the safe harbor. So we help with that. We help make sure the money gets moved. And then, we work with them to get all the data so that we can do the calculation, and then, work coordinate with the CPA because the numbers from the disc return tie to the corporate return. And but really the biggest differentiator is there's really two ways to do the calculation. There's the easy way and the hard way.
Hmm,
And we're one of the few firms that does it the hard way.
got
And
it.
people always ask, well, why do we want to do it the hard way? And the reason is the hard way, on average, doubles or triples the benefit.
Oh, wow.
So said another way, it's a more granular way to do the calculation. The
Mhm.
simple way is kind of the calculation we did. You take total exports divided by total sales multiplied by taxable income, and then there's some other gyrations, and that becomes the IC disc commission.
Okay.
And so
Interesting.
it's very simple. But the hard way is the IRS actually allows you to calculate the commission as granularly as the transactional level. So for our clients, we are allowed to calculate the commission 18 different ways for every single transaction.
Really?
And we get to cherry pick that for every single line item.
Mhm.
And so one of the reasons most other firms don't do that is there's a significant investment in software and training. And so, I mean, that really is our competitive advantage, quite frankly. If somebody just wants to do the simple calc, it's not that difficult. Yeah, I mean, it should probably make sure your disc is in compliance, but that's really our differentiator. And then working with the client for them to get us data that's not too cumbersome for them to provide, but still good enough that we can use. And then we have to do a lot of data cleanup frequently and pivot tables and stuff that the smart people on the team work with, not me.
Well, that's pretty interesting. I didn't realize that because again, similar to R&D, there's a couple of different calculation methods that you can use. Some more in depth than others, but really making sure you're capturing. If you're going to do it, you might as well get every dollar you would qualify for. So that makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
So shifting gears just a little bit from the technical aspects of IC Disc and setting that up, back to I love what you said, the riches are in the niches. So you were saying that you kind of started or joined this now alliance of IC disc providers. And then I had also mentioned when we started that you have a podcast. I think it's the IC Disc Show, where you interview a lot of different people. Tell me a little bit about kind of your evolution of how you've continued to kind of grow and expand. I appreciate your marketing perspective and obviously some of that drive to kind of try different things and continue to expand. So, what possessed you to do that? And tell us about your successes or failures if they haven't been successes.
Sure. So, so an interesting personal story on the riches or in the niches that you may find interesting. So when I was about 33, lifelong bachelor, well, it's funny. At my age today, lifelong doesn't sound like 33 years old, doesn't sound like lifelong anything, but I was a bachelor until then. And I thought I'm going to get serious by getting married. And so I had this multi-pronged strategy. I called up all my married friends and talked to their wives. Hey, do you have any single, any cute single friends? But then online dating was in its infancy. And
Oh,
so I took this unique approach that what I observed was that what most guys did was they thought, well, I want a broad net. I want a big net. So my criteria is women between the ages of 18 and 88, all body types, all religion, all everything. And then I'll get this big net. They'll come in and then I'll keep the fish I'm interested in. I'll throw the others out. And I had a different approach. I said, I was looking for a tall, slender, athletic, Christian woman who was committed to excellence.
hmm,
Okay. Who was, and at the time, I think I was 34, and my age requirement was a year older than me to 2 years younger than me. So, I mean,
okay.
super narrow.
Yeah.
And my friends are like, you're an idiot. Nobody's going to get back to you.
Yeah.
And they were almost right. But here's where I really first learned about niche marketing is rarely did I have anybody interested, but when I did, the email usually went, "My God, you must be my soulmate. Like you are describing me. I'm 5'10". I played college volleyball. I do this, and, and so what happened was I realized there was this concept called resonance, that my competition were all these guys with this broad marketing approach, the dating competition. And so they would just see one guy after another, just looking for all kinds of women, send me your photo, I'll decide if you're cute enough. And what had happened was it was just very effective because when I would, have a date with them, they knew that I wasn't just filtering my answer to coincide with who they were,
Mhm.
because it was all right there in black and white. I was looking for a woman between the ages of 33 and 36 who was tall and athletic and slender. And so that's when I first learned about niche marketing. And I must say it was very effective. And I'm married to a woman who's 5'11", athletic, got me into cycling, ambitious. She joked we both had the same self-help library. But
So
anyway, so
so wait, did you meet her on this dating platform?
no, we met through a common friend introduced us
Oh.
actually.
Oh,
But
shoot.
but what
I
the
was
online
wanting to
did though
hear
was,
that.
but I was very clear though, because when I was talking to this common friend, I'm like, hey, you have any tall, single, athletic, healthy, non-smoking, fun to be around women, smart women that you have as friends? And, one of them would say, well, I've got this one, but she's a real handful. I mean, she intimidates most guys. She's intense, and sure, I'll take a shot. And yeah, and that was 20 years ago in July.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That is a great story, though. I love that.
So that's when I learned about the niches. And so the same thing happens with the IC disc. Like we just picked up a client from one of your competitors who dabbles in the IC disc,
Mhm.
who they were dissatisfied with several things about the firm, one of which was this particular firm had received a lot of press earlier this year that did not give the firm a high degree of confidence in their ongoing abilities to serve them.
Mhm.
And so they reached out to us and a couple other firms, and we ended up getting the work. But the reason we got the work was they wanted really an IC disc specialist. And, they talked to a big four firm, they talked to a large regional, and there was the same kind of resonance I found when dating, that like I have a book on the IC disc,
Mhm.
the only book on it really. I have a podcast on the IC disc, the only podcast. So because of that, when somebody is looking for a true IC disc expert, it resonates. Now, the drawback to that model, and the reason a lot of people say my model is flawed, is that 99% of the companies out there, we are not set up to serve. I mean, we're voluntary, and a lot of it, we probably could have other services, but that's how we do it. And if the legislation ever changes, then,
Mhm.
we lose 100% of our clients. And, most firms are not comfortable with that concentration risk,
Sure. Yeah, that makes
but
sense.
it's,
And
it's worked for us.
all your eggs in one basket, that can be concerning, but, it is fascinating that it's stuck around, legislation has continued, and, you've made a career of something, really being a specialist, and I think, again, earlier in the podcast, I mentioned that, that I think there's a lot of value to that in the CPA industry too, that really looking to drive a niche is such a huge opportunity of really understanding an industry and understanding that clients anymore want that expertise and guidance and someone who gets what they're doing and understands what their business is and what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis and how we can essentially come in and provide value. And I'm sure you're the same. You're an expert in IC disc, but I'm sure you bring a lot of value in a very robust way to these businesses. That's pretty amazing.
We hope so. So yeah. So in answer to your question about the podcast,
Mhm.
it was really just an extension of the idea that, in some circles, I started being referred to as, quote, the icy disc guy.
Oh, yeah.
And,
I thought that was your name.
I own a lot of different domain names, and I really should get the icy or icydiscguy.com. But it further just accentuated that we want to be the icy disc shop. And it just accentuated that. And in the smaller your niche, I heard this marketing guy say that you can be the mayor, you can be the self appointed mayor of any small community. You just kind of have to appoint yourself, whether it's virtual or real. And like he talks about, if you're, say if you have a pest control business, or let's say you're a real estate agent,
Mhm.
and you just decide, you know what, I'm going to be the real estate agent for this little section of this town, and I'm going to own that, and I'm going to market on that, and I'm going to specialize on that, that you really can eliminate the competition who are trying to be more generalist by
Yeah.
that. But it's scary though, because you have to voluntarily say no to all this other business. It's like when you talk to an attorney and you say, "Hey, I'd love to refer you a client. You seem like a nice guy or lady. What type of law do you practice?" And they say, "Well, we could help with mergers and corporate formations." Okay, that sounds good. But we also can handle a divorce, a speeding ticket, a will. And so what happens is you don't think of them for anything, like nothing resonates. But if they said to you, all we do, the only thing we do are help people who have speeding tickets who are going more than 100 miles an hour. We have a whole practice just focused on that. It probably gives you confidence that if you are going really fast, that like that's so. This, if a friend tells me, "Hey, I got busted doing 110," I know exactly who to call.
Yeah.
But that's something I learned from Ron Baker, the famous author who wrote Pricing on Purpose, Value Based Pricing,
Mhm.
one of the most influential people in the CPA profession about that niche. Anyway, I'm
You
kind
know
of rambling on here.
no, that was awesome because I think that phrase is literally profound. To your point that when you're talking with someone and they say, "Yeah, we do all of that," that you don't think of them for anything. It's such a valid point because you're exactly right. And I've met many people like that, that it's like it's so broad that you don't have something to focus on. So you just kind of lose it all together. So that was an extremely valid point. I love that you mentioned that.
Well, and it's a joke. If I can just add, it's such a joke. If you go to any CPA firm's website, and again, because I am a
Mhm.
former CPA, I can pick on them, that they all say the same thing. We specialize in 97 different things, right? And the
Well,
term specialize, like, and they never say we're generalists. We have a working knowledge of a lot of things. We're not the best at any of them, but we have a working knowledge on all of them, and we'll be your quarterback to connect you to experts. They never say that. They say we specialize in corporate tax, individual tax, trust work, estate tax, R&D, cost segregation,
yeah.
energy efficiency stuff, bookkeeping, on and then you're like, really? You specialize in all those things.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I have a, client that I work with who I've recently met, this last year, and, uh, I think it's so fascinating. He specializes in gymnastics facilities and gyms, and I was like, "Wait, like, I mean, is that just something you've done a lot of, and so, have some of those clients in addition to other stuff?" And he was like, "No, that's all I do." And I asked him about his background. Well, he had done gymnastics through high school, and then he was a college cheerleader, a male cheerleader, and, did all the big stuff and kind of got into that niche. And now that is all he does. He has a very successful CPA firm. He created a conference, an annual conference of business owners in this space. He
I
works with
love it.
like he's got like a significant amount of the market in that specific industry all over the country because he's so good at understanding how to help them with their business. and understanding what it entails to run that type of a business. So to your point,
I
it
love that.
really is fascinating. And I was so floored when he told me that that's, all he was doing.
Well, and think about the resonance of those conversations. So he gets referred to a gym owner in Oklahoma City, and he probably doesn't remote. He probably doesn't go visit everyone for a first meeting. He has a Zoom call, and he probably just says, "Hey, I've got a few questions. I was looking at," and through his questions, it is obvious he knows what he's doing. And he's like, "Hey, I'm just curious, your balance beam, are you using the X290 balance beam or the 1472? And do you like the balance beam by this one or this one? Because when I was a gymnast, I really liked this one. But then over time I've graduated and
Yep.
and all of a sudden, their CPA, their banker, their attorney, they don't understand anything about the business. It's kind of a joke. You have to educate them. They don't understand anything. And here
Mhm.
this person comes in and you're like, oh my God, we don't have to train them. They know our business.
Yep.
Who cares if he charges twice as much as our local guy? We're probably getting more value. And we're not wasting our time having to explain how we do things.
Right. Yeah. And here's the next step to that. He's doing something he's really passionate about. He gets to
Hmm.
work in businesses that's something he loves, that's something he enjoyed doing through his youth and through college, put him through college, and something that he gets and has some intrinsic benefit to him from kind of a passionate standpoint. So that then shifts into this whole, this whole show is healthy, wealthy, and wise. I figure if there's any way I can motivate a single person to be more passionate and authentic and vulnerable with who they are as a person, and it's not just about the business, and then being true to themselves, that is, I believe, where we're transitioning even in society. I think COVID has pushed us into that because we were so de-socialized for a couple of years and cut off from each other and realizing how much it matters. I think pushing into more of this Zoom remote environment all of a sudden made it more acceptable for us to be sitting in our homes and maybe a dog barks because, I've worked at home for the
Right.
last 7 years and I can tell you 7 years ago, I was petrified if my dog barked because God forbid that one of my clients heard that and thought, "You're not even working. You're calling me from your house? Like, that is so unprofessional." And
Mhm.
today, what it now has changed into is, "Oh my gosh, oh, your little girl just ran across the background. How old is she? That's so neat." And it's opened this world, I believe, to letting us be more real and connecting with people and
Mhm.
allowing the door to open. So, in the spirit of that, I would love to understand about you and how you have balanced your profession and your work and your success with what are you passionate about and how have you balanced that? Because that's, I think, the next thing, especially having come from the CPA world, having worked in a Big 4 firm, you know that the requirements are so difficult, the hourly requirements, the time, the old sense of, initiation that you have to put in 100 hours a week or work around the clock or sleep at the office, during tax season. There's so many of these things but there's not a significant focus on taking care of ourselves mentally and physically and finding that balance. And, younger people, I think it's harder, but they are demanding it more now than I think we did when we were younger. And the industry is going to have to
Sure.
evolve to that. So I'll apologize. I'll stop rambling. You can probably tell I'm passionate once we get to this topic. But yeah,
Sure.
I wanna know, what makes you tick and how have you balanced your life with your business success?
So I am I am someone, so I'm an oldest of two boys, and I'm somebody who's always had a high need of control over my life since I was like 5 years old. My mother tells me, and there's a certain arrogance that I think I can manage my life better than anyone else can manage my life. So I've always
Mhm.
resisted rules, controls. And it's why I was never a good employee. They just considered me a troublemaker. I'd ask too many questions. And so my biggest fear in business is self-imposed constraints that I'm not even aware that I've done to myself.
Hmm.
And actually, it's my biggest fear in life is that I don't, I don't, so I'm very cognizant of making sure that I don't impose any constraints on myself. But Peter Diamandis, who wrote a book called Abundance, says that artificial constraints actually foster creativity. So that are arbitrary constraints, not artificial, but arbitrary. And so I've always been, kind of an outside the box thinker, a just, kind of go to the beat of a different drummer. And so, probably the best example, and it's funny how the arguments I've gotten into from this decision. So I think 8, 9 years ago, my wife has her own business. She's very successful. We don't have children and we just worked all the time. And I said, we need to break the cycle. We just work all the time. And I said, I found a house to rent in Buena Vista, Colorado, surrounded by the collegiate peaks, 14,000-foot mountains.
Mhm.
Let's go rate this for 2 months and let's go up there. And the dog and I and the bikes were able to be there the whole 2 months. She was there for, about half the time. She was back and forth. And about 3 weeks in, I came to the realization that I would be okay making half as much money if I could spend all summer in the mountains.
Mm.
And so I restructured my business to be able to do that. And I was willing to even make less money. And then we were fortunate enough to buy a place 6 or 7 years ago. And so I've asked myself the question, like, how do I spend all summer in Colorado? And that creates lots of creativity, how I, kind of have to do things and delegate things. And so for me, being there all summer is just a reminder every year about the ability we have. So I forget who it was that said, the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable man expects the world to adapt to him. Therefore, all progress comes from the unreasonable man. And so I've always tried to, and I forget who said it. And so I've always tried to be that unreasonable man who tries to make the world accommodate me. So that is one example. And so here's the funny part about it. Everybody, including my wife, like I've had this conversation with hundreds of people, other business owners, professionals, and they find out, because I'm in Houston, Texas most of the year, and most
Mhm.
people in Houston would rather spend their summers in the mountains. Just, it's a fact.
Yeah.
And they always say the same thing. Oh, I'm so jealous. Like, I'd love to do that. And I said, well, why don't you? Oh, I can't. Well, why don't you rent a place for a month? Just try it for a month. And, it's usually a guy, your family can be there. You can fly back and forth.
Mhm.
No, no. And they always say the same thing, Heidi. You don't understand my business. My
Mhm.
business is different than yours,
Yeah.
because of, and I call it fighting for their limitations. They explain to me all the reasons they can't rent a house in the mountains, even though they tell me they would kill to do that. They would do anything to do that. And so, really, I'd say the number one thing isn't so much what I specifically do, it's a recognition that I don't want to have self imposed limitations. And I encourage other people to look closely at your self imposed limitations. Because, especially these days with remote working, I don't believe that a partner in a CPA firm cannot rent a house for the month of June in the mountains somewhere and be gone the month of June. Now,
Mhm.
August is a little tougher with tax deadlines and such, but I think they could.
Yeah.
And I push back on that. Now, for some people, they don't care about going to the mountains, and that's fine. But anyway, I'm kind of rambling. So in summary, be aware of your self-imposed limitations and don't fight for those self-imposed limitations.
That's huge. Well, and you told me something the other day. It was another quote. I don't know if you remember it, but it was something about who gets the credit. Do you remember
Mm.
it? What was that quote?
It came from Dan Sullivan, the founder of Strategic Coach.
Mm.
He said, you can accomplish anything you want in life if you don't care who gets the credit. And
Yeah.
I came up with a corollary of that that says, you can accomplish anything you want in life if you don't care about capturing all the profit.
Mm. Yep. Well, I think that's I that also resonated with me when you said that the other day, because I think that is a big part of what we deal with, again, in accounting and really any business, is that we have to be able to delegate. And in our consulting group, the Growth Partnership, we use the term the no look pass. Having the ability to do a no look pass and surrounding ourselves with people we trust and we know we can rely on, and not feeling like we have to get the credit or every penny, and being able to understand how that can open us up and, to your point, topple some of those constraints that we really bind ourselves with. So really, really interesting. I love that. You mentioned that you cycle. So is that part of being in the mountains, or is that something you do year round? You've always been a
Yeah,
cyclist?
I would do it year round, but it's a lot harder here. Part of the reason we chose where we did in Breckenridge is we have over 100 miles of paved bike paths that are not on the road. So, like, we can drive right all the way to Vail. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's really safe and world class mountain biking. So it's pretty unbalanced. When I'm up there, I probably cycle 300 to 400 miles a week,
Wow.
6 days a week. And then in Houston, I just tend to go to the gym and do a few maintenance rides because it's just not as inspiring, riding in the shadow of the mountains. And then just the cardiovascular challenge of doing a 10-mile climb up a 4% grade at 10,000 feet of elevation. You really know you're alive.
Yeah. Yeah, you're alive. Well, yeah, that's to say the least. That's always been my biggest struggle, is I have always stayed active, but I have zero ability for endurance, and cardio has always been a struggle. So have you tried an e-bike? That's the whole new rage, is everybody's riding e-bikes, which I I've really tried to bow my back against any of the side by sides, the motorized things, because I'm like, it's all things to keep us from moving, and we have to move to live. But everybody I know is getting these e-bikes. So I'm beginning to
You should get
wonder,
one.
you think?
I'm a
Is
I'm a big fan of them for other people
See?
because an e-bike that gets ridden is far better than a non-e-bike that doesn't get ridden.
David, you and your one-liners are like the best thing ever.
Well, I that's very generous of you to say that. I was a fast twitch muscle athlete, high jumper, long jumper, sprinter,
Yeah.
basketball player, volleyball player, and I struggle with endurance sports.
Mhm.
But the beauty of the cycle is you get to cheat with the cycle and it doesn't penalize you so much. Like if you go run for 10 miles, you have to run every second of the 10. But on a bicycle, you can regularly coast. And I find for me, my wife calls it active recovery in the spinning world,
Mhm.
that you actually get it. It really allows you to compensate for not being an endurance athlete when you have a bicycle. And then when you have an e-bike, you can further compensate. I just wanted to add that.
No, I appreciate that, because I think, any of these little tips are things that people don't think about. And e-bikes are opening up the world to people who would not have otherwise gotten a bike, or wouldn't feel comfortable going on a trail ride or cycling, because there's a hill between here and there that I'm not comfortable and don't feel like I could make it up. And nobody wants to be that person on the side of the road walking with their bike because they can't get to the top of that one hill that is that
Sure.
limitation to where you need to go. And, I'm hoping again that we can kind of motivate people to just try something different, to give themselves the opportunity to move, because I really think that it is developing the whole person, and bringing it full circle back to our worlds as professionals and consultants with our clients and taxpayers and tax seasons, and the stresses that we have. It's these tools and being somewhat active or having something we're passionate about that changes everything, and how much value that brings to us as whole people, to take care of ourselves physically, mentally, and of course intellectually. So I love the mention of the books as well. So before we wrap up, what if you could recommend any one book I know that's a difficult question because so many different topics, but what is one of the most profound books that you've read that had the biggest impact on you?
That's easy. If I could have five, I would tell you those. But if I could have just one, it would be Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl,
Ah,
would be the number one. Yeah, he was a concentration camp survivor
oh,
who survived only because he had the need. He had a manuscript. He was a psychiatrist,
mhm.
Jewish psychiatrist. He was about to publish a book. He had a manuscript done. He was captured, put in a concentration camp. His book was taken from him and burned, his
Mm,
manuscript. And what kept him going for 5 years was A, the desire to publish that book. And then secondly, to share what he'd learned from being in that horrific setting.
mm,
And from that, developed a whole form of therapy called logotherapy that he developed. But and it's on most, when you look at like the most influential books of all time, it's usually in the top five. That book, the Bible, and then a book or two by Ayn Rand
mm.
is frequently in there. So if
Wow.
I had five, Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead by Ayn Rand,
Mm.
and then probably the 80-20 principle by, I forget what his name is,
Yep.
who wrote that.
Yeah, I don't remember the author on that one either, but that's a great one. Yep.
And then anything by Malcolm Gladwell, his stuff,
Mhm.
I really enjoy. But if you're only going to read one, Man's Search for Meaning is and it's a cult following. I mean, when you find another person who's read that book, there's a resonance. Because when you're reading his description, it's just like they were so starved that when he would go to like the infirmary where he worked at, there was one step to get up there, and he was so malnourished that he would have to get to the step, marshal his energy, take some deep breaths to make it up that one step, and then he would have to rest for 5 minutes
Oh,
before he could like go in.
oof.
Um,
Well, I appreciate the recommendation. Maybe we'll link to that at the bottom of the podcast. I love books. I have not read that one, and clearly, with all of the amazing one-liners, I love that you're clearly a reader. So, anyway, we're up on time. David, thank you so much for joining me, and I've loved getting to know you a little bit better personally, and also understanding more about the icy disc. It has been fantastic. We have enjoyed working with you for a long time, and I hope that will continue for many more years. Thanks again for joining me today. I hope everyone's enjoyed the podcast. So please subscribe so you don't miss out for our future podcasts. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
well, thank you very much, Heidi. It's been a treat.
Thanks.